we've sort of returned now to what was my original theme, which was Cataclysm, where we're looking at various earthquakes and tsunamis and cosmic phenomena. And I'm not going to go into all of these things again, but just to say where we got to thus far, and there's been rather a lot of talks, and thank you for the opportunity to do this. I really appreciate it. We looked at in the beginning and in the ancient times. We considered Sodom and Gomorrah, and then of course we did a detour into the Exodus controversy, which actually lasted for 5 talks, and to be frank, this could be part 6 to a certain extent, although we are now moving on into the land of Israel. Well, what I want to do here is to consider Cataclysm in the land of Israel, or at least we began with the crossing of the river Jordan, which was the beginning of the conquest in the last talk. And I want to look again, because from this moment on, this image actually is very relevant, because along this line we have what is known as the Dead Sea Transform Fault. And the thing that is so amazing to me is the significance of this geological fault line in the history of Israel. We've considered it a lot thus far, and we will continue to consider it in the remaining parts of the talk. And I've highlighted here where Jerusalem is, and directly south of Jerusalem you have the city of Arad, where Carol and I live, and you will see that actually in terms of its position to the Dead Sea Transform Fault, we're in a very similar position. Jerusalem is in the mountains, and you take the journey from Jerusalem to Jericho, and you're going down this very steep cliff, which is the side of the Dead Sea Transform Fault. And then you have Arad to the south of it, and we're also in the mountains. We're fairly high above sea level, and you can travel down from Arad to the Dead Sea, to the southern end of the Dead Sea, and you see a very similar environment. If we look at this picture, which we've seen again, it reminds us that Jericho is pretty close to the Dead Sea Transform Fault. And we read this, and we read it last time, yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of the Arava, which is the Dead Sea, the Salt Sea, was completely cut off. But the interesting thing about the earthquake that may have taken place at that time to block the Jordan River flow south has actually happened several times in history, and the most recent time was in July 1927, and it says this: the epicenter was located in the northern Dead Sea area. The towns of Jericho, Jerusalem, Nablus, Shechem and Tiberias were badly hit. Of course, all of these towns are very close to the Dead Sea Transform Fault. In 1927 it says, and an estimated 500 people were killed in those locations. Today, scientists believe the magnitude of the quake was 6.25, which is serious, but not as serious as the Amos earthquake, and we'll get to that in due course. But we're moving on from there and considering the Battle of Jericho. But we have a problem. When we come to consider the Battle of Jericho. And it takes us back to something that we considered at the very beginning of our talks on the Exodus. And I'm not going to go into it in any great detail, but we need to remind ourselves of the problem. The problem is this. Academics believe that the Exodus happened in the 13th century BCE. There's a reason for it. the assumption that is made is that the Pharaoh of the Exodus is Ramesses II. And he has dates, his reign is between 1279 to 1213 BCE, which of course is in the 13th century. Our problem is, both for the Israelite sojourn in Egypt and more particularly maybe the conquest of the land, particularly the Battle of Jericho, in the 13th century, there is no archaeological evidence. Now, I reminded you a few times now about this Egyptologist, archaeologist David Rohl, and he is the one that really has challenged more than anybody else the standard, accepted academic chronology of Egypt. And you can read about this in the book, his book, A Test of Time. Now I'm going to show again a clip that I showed once before about David Rohl, and he gives just a quick overview of his position regarding the chronology. It's part of an advert that comes from Patterns in Evidence, so I've kept it as it was.
David Rohl, best-selling author and historian, delivers a series of thought-provoking lectures that reveal groundbreaking new evidence for some of the major events in the Old Testament. David was most recently seen in the award-winning documentary film, Patterns of Evidence, The Exodus, where his research on the redating of Egyptian history became the crucial turning point in filmmaker Timothy Mahoney's search for the Israelite sojourn in the land of the Pharaohs, the Exodus from Egypt, and the conquest of the Promised Land. Listen and learn as David Rohl reveals the true historical setting for some of the Bible's greatest stories.
Here's the city wall on top. Here's the plastered glacis, and here's the revetment wall at the bottom, made of stone. And then the Israelites would have attacked this, but they would have real difficulty in getting up that slippery, plastered slope, while people were throwing slingshots at them and firing at them from above. Very difficult. But of course, they didn't need to attack the city because the wall fell down.
In 4 visually stunning presentations, David Rohl dares to challenge the current consensus among academics that the Bible is predominantly a work of fiction.
And then in the middle, we have that. Nothing. No Jericho. No buildings, no people, no pottery. And that is where the conquest is placed. That is why people say the conquest is a myth. Because there was no Jericho whose walls fell down.
Can his objective approach to the archaeological evidence re-establish the Bible as the world's first history book?
So something's wrong here. Either academics have got things wrong or the Bible's wrong.
To order your double DVD copy of the David Rohl Lectures, go to patternsofevidence.com. Order your copy today.
But we asked this question before when we were considering the timing of the Exodus. What does the Bible say? As evangelical believers, we can have confidence to turn to the Bible for an answer as to when the Exodus took place and as to when the Battle of Jericho took place. And we looked at this verse before in 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 1. Because this is what the Bible says, folks. In the 480th year after the Israelites had come out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, he began to build the temple of the Lord. And this can be dated, the 4th year of Solomon's reign, which happens to be 967 BCE. Now, we can add 479 years to this year, this date, and we get 1446 BCE, which is the date that the Bible gives that the Exodus took place. And this happens to be in the 15th century BCE, not the 13th century. It was 200 years earlier. And of course, 200 years earlier, we find archaeological evidence both in Egypt and in Jericho. So, based on that number, we can be confident that the Battle of Jericho took place around 1406 BCE in the 15th century. And there is archaeological evidence, as I say. But I don't need to say very much more, but let's think about this just for a moment, because just as we saw last time that when the priests put their feet in the Jordan River, there was some geological earthquake, I would imagine, that blocked the flow of the Jordan River as they put their feet in. So we can come to the conclusion that timing is everything. We can have a naturalistic explanation for some of these biblical phenomena, but that doesn't take away in any way the miraculous nature of these events, because timing is everything. And this, of course, is repeated when we come to consider the Battle of Jericho, because it says this in Joshua chapter 6. When the trumpet sounded, the people shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the people gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So every man charged straight in, and they took the city. There's a person we need to consider and to remember at this point. We need to remember Rahab. She's obviously mentioned in the story in the book of Joshua, but she's also mentioned because she features, I believe, in the ancestry of Jesus. So Rahab is an interesting person, because it says this in Joshua. After the walls fell down, the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother and brothers, and all who belonged to her. It's incredible. Why is it incredible? I like this picture that I found. This, of course, is Rahab and the spies, the two spies, if you see them on the roof, being hidden in straw, and you see this red cord, this red rope coming down from the window, and it says this: so she let them, that's the two spies, down by a rope through the window. Now this is the point. For the house she lived in was part of the city wall. But the walls came down. No, in the case of Rahab, the Lord protected her and all her family, even though she was living in the wall itself. This is a really interesting point, because for Rahab, Jericho becomes a city of refuge. And of course, I'm reminded of this verse, which we've used a few times now. This gives us confidence. Whatever happens in the future, this gives us confidence. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth or the walls of Jericho give way. If our trust is in the Lord and we're serving Him, then we will be kept safe, whatever happens in the future. To be frank with you folks, that's all I want to say about the Battle of Jericho, although there's much more things that could be said, particularly the aftermath of the Battle of Jericho. There's an awful lot that could be said about that. But actually, I want to go on to this point, because this is where, in a sense, this talk is part 6 of the Exodus series, when we consider Elijah's earthquake. And I really like this image, and I'm going to use it a lot. Because we need to remind ourselves that Elijah is here hidden in a cave at Mount Sinai, We spoke about it very, very briefly last time when we considered the location of Mount Sinai, because we need to take this one into account as well. Elijah travels to Sinai, and it's a long journey. Why does he go? Well, his journey is actually going to begin at Mount Carmel. And of course we know what took place. An enormous victory, an unexpected victory, against all the odds. Elijah standing, he thought, alone against the prophets of Baal. It's an incredible moment in the history of Israel. It's an incredible moment in the life of Elijah. And he travels from Mount Carmel to Jezreel, which is at one end of the Jezreel Valley, as it is called. The other end of it, interestingly, is Megiddo, from which we get the word Har, the hill of Har-Mageddon. That's an interesting one, but we won't go into that one now. This is what it says in 1 Kings chapter 18. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah. I mean, he's just coming out of the most incredible victory. The power of the Lord came upon Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab, who was king obviously, all the way to Jezreel. What happens in Jezreel? Elijah hears about what Jezebel is planning to do. Obviously the wife of King Ahab. And he's afraid. He's human. He's afraid. And he ran for his life. Where does he run to? Well, that's an interesting one for me. He travels to Beersheba. I find it difficult to say it because for me it's Beersheba, or we know it as Beersheba in English. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. That's quite a long journey in itself. The question is, where does he go? He leaves his servant in Beersheba, and then he himself went on a day's journey into the desert. So, to be frank with you, I'm not quite sure exactly where he went. He might have gone directly in that direction, as you can see on screen, or alternatively, he might have turned a corner. Because if he turned a corner, he may have come to Arad on his way to the Dead Sea. That's a possibility. That is a real possibility, but I can't know that for certain. But we do have, in and around Arad, this type of environment, very desert, and you see these trees. If you travel from Arad down to the Dead Sea, you see scenes like this, and you see these trees called a broom tree in 1 Kings chapter 19 in the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I mean, when you think about it, isn't that just so incredible? That someone like Elijah, who had been involved with this incredible victory against the prophets of Baal, before you know where he was, he's in the desert and praying that he might die. God is very gracious because he provides for Elijah. It says this, strengthened by food, he travelled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night, and the word of the Lord came to him. This is really interesting, isn't it? What are you doing here, Elijah? Incredible, incredible. But we need to think about the route that he took, because there's something really interesting here. We do not know what the route was. Now, remember, he's coming from Beersheba, and he's running or walking to Mount Sinai. We do not know the route, but we know that it took 40 days because we've already read this. Strengthened by food, he travelled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, I'll use Google Maps at this point, because at the north, here you can see Beersheba. This is how you see it in Hebrew, Beersheba. And he travels, well, in this particular instance, this is how far it is from Jebel el-Lawz. Remember, this is probably the most popular site of Mount Sinai amongst evangelicals who take an interest in the Exodus. I'm not one of that number, as it happens. Well, what else have we got? Jebel Musa is here. And this is 423 kilometres, a little bit further than the last one. So if it takes him 40 days, he's only travelling about 10 kilometres a day. Now, even I could do that in the desert, and that's saying something. I have my own thoughts about where Mount Sinai might be, and I'd put it further south, but it's still from Beersheba, coming all the way down the Jordan Valley and further on around the Gulf of Aqaba to somewhere like Sharm el-Sheikh. We're talking 466 kilometres. It took him 40 days and 40 nights. But we don't know the route, because we don't actually know the site of Mount Sinai when all is said and done. But actually, the fact that it took 40 days and 40 nights is somewhat surprising, because it says this in the book of Deuteronomy, in the first chapter. It takes 11 days to go from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by the Mount Seir road. Well, we need to look at this map, because this is something that's really interesting, or at least it interests me. Here you see Kadesh Barnea, but I want to refer you to this article. You could take a note of it if you've got the opportunity to do it, because it's really, really interesting. Because there's a real issue about the location of Kadesh Barnea. You know, so many of these places people have very different opinions, and I've got a difference of opinion, because the traditional location of Kadesh Barnea is here, as you can see. So what's my question? Why have I got a problem with it? To be honest, this talk has given me the opportunity to verbalise something that I've always struggled with. The location of Kadesh Barnea. You might think, oh, it's not that important, Geoff. Surely it's not that important. What's my problem? My problem is that this traditional site is actually in the land of Canaan. Why should that be a problem? This is within the territory that has been promised to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob in perpetuity. Why is it a problem for me? Well, I like this picture. This is Moses striking the rock, not the rock near Mount Sinai. This is the rock that is located in Kadesh. When again the Israelites are really grumbling that they haven't got water to drink. It says this in Deuteronomy chapter 32. Therefore, because Moses strikes the rock in anger, he strikes it twice. I wonder if you remember the story. Therefore you will see the land only from a distance. You will not enter the land I am giving to the people of Israel. Why is this an issue? There are two places that have been suggested as the location for Kadesh. We have looked at the traditional place, and now we're looking at another place. Why it's problematic is that here we talk about the wilderness of Paran, and here we talk about the wilderness of Zin. And it says this in Deuteronomy, we've already looked at it. It takes 11 days to go from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by the Mount Seir road. Now, Mount Seir is here, located on the map, which is in the territory of Edom. In fact, it's on the other side of the Dead Sea Transform Fault. And I believe that this is the site of the amazing earthquake that took place in response to the rebellion of Korah. We read about it. The earth opened up and swallowed those that were objecting to Moses' leadership. And I believe that it was very close to the Dead Sea Transform Fault. And so I'm of the opinion that in fact the actual location of Kadesh is in Edom and not actually in what became the Promised Land. Here, now this is an interesting place because it is the site of Petra. In fact, the name of the mountain, which is the mountain of the altar, Jebel al-Magbar, which is here, which I think is probably the site of ancient Kadesh, which is quite an interesting one, which of course is not in the land of Israel. One of the things that is really also remarkable is that this mountain has been suggested, albeit in 1927, to be a possible site for the biblical Mount Sinai. This is a book that was written by this German archaeologist, which is really strange in that we've already read in the Bible that it takes 11 days to go from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by the Mount Seir road. So it can't be both Kadesh Barnea and Mount Sinai. It can't be the two things. So we need to refer to the Bible for our understanding of this point. But this may well be the site of ancient Kadesh. But let's think about Mount Sinai again for a moment. In my opinion, and I spelt this out in my last talk, that Mount Sinai cannot be in the land of Midian. It just cannot be in the land of Midian, but it is absolutely in an earthquake zone. For example, it says this: Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled violently. So we can say for certain that Mount Sinai is in an earthquake zone. Of course, we read that about Mount Sinai in the Torah, but we also read this in 1 Kings. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. So I like this picture because, and I showed it last time, which shows geological activity in the area. And of course, here's our Dead Sea Transform Fault, and you can see all of the geological activity that is taking place around it. Now, we have 2 earthquakes within this area, the Sharm el-Sheikh earthquake of 1969 and the Nuweiba earthquake of 1995. Now, if I use Google Earth, and this is my own work, you see the two earthquakes marked, Nuweiba Beach and Sharm el-Sheikh. And here you see the two places that have been suggested as the site of Mount Sinai. Now, combining the two maps, and it's not absolutely straightforward to do it, but I tried to do it, you see some interesting things. You see that actually Jebel el-Lawz is not in an area which is prone to that many earthquakes. Now, this is neither here nor there, but I use it as some supporting evidence that also helps me to conclude that actually Jebel el-Lawz cannot be the site of Mount Sinai. Jebel Musa, here you see there's much more geological activity. This is my hypothesis, folks. This is my hypothesis. Nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows for sure. But I believe that Mount Sinai may no longer exist. The Lord spoke to Elijah and said, "What are you doing here? Why are you going here?" And I'm wondering if he's going to say that to so many people who are interested in locating the site of Mount Sinai. I believe that it could be one of those mountains that is spoken about in Psalm 46, a mountain that falls into the heart of the sea. It would be the Red Sea at this point. So let's remind ourselves a little bit of the story that took place when Elijah was at Mount Sinai. Yes, we've already said this, and the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah's fed up, and he says this to the Lord, "I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." Of course, Paul quotes this issue about Elijah's concern in Romans chapter 11, but we won't go into that now. But this is such an interesting story. The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Reminds us of what took place with Moses, of course. And he was hidden in the cleft of the rock. I wonder if that cleft of the rock became the cave in which Elijah sought refuge. It's an interesting thought that I've just had. Question is, did Elijah actually go out of the cave at this point? Did he actually go out and stand on the mountainside? And I don't think he did, actually. Because lots of things happen. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. Remember, this is an earthquake zone, folks. And I highlight these words. The powerful wind itself tore the mountains apart. So much geological activity took place while Elijah was seeking refuge in his cave, which also gives me further information which makes me think that Mount Sinai has ceased to exist. But nobody can know that for certain. In fact, my hypothesis would suggest that Mount Sinai itself is very exposed to the elements, in order for that event that is described in 1 Kings chapter 19 to take place. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire came a gentle whisper. Now, take note of these words, folks. When Elijah heard it, that is, the gentle whisper, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Now he's going out of his cave to hear the Lord speak to him. And what does the Lord say again? This is really incredible. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And then it says, the Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came." So Elijah returns, and I think that this is probably the route that he takes. You see it marked in blue. He's on his way to Damascus, because the Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus." And here you've got on screen, the fact is the distance now is 694 kilometres. So we don't know how long it took him, but he went probably along the Dead Sea Transform Fault. And when he gets to Damascus, it says, the Lord says to him, "When you get there, anoint Hazael, king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel. And anoint Elisha to succeed you as prophet." That's the journey that I think he took, and the Dead Sea Transform Fault continues into Lebanon itself, which you can see here. And this leads me to show you this picture. Here you see Damascus, that's where Elijah's going to get to, but it also shows you the continuation of the Dead Sea Transform Fault, which takes you through Lebanon. And that might sound obscure, but actually it's something that we're going to consider at great length when we come to look at the Amos earthquake next time. The words of Amos, one of the shepherds of Tekoa, concerning Israel 2 years before the earthquake when Uzziah was king of Judah. This is one of the most significant earthquakes in the history of Israel, and we'll talk about that next time. But hang on, folks. If you would give me the opportunity, I want to talk, and this is far more important to me than anything else that I've said so far. I want to consider the current situation in the light of the story of Elijah. And I'm going to ask a question, and I feel as though I almost want to weep. What if? What if? That's the question. I hope you'll allow me to cover this, because this is something that I've felt very strongly about for a few days, particularly after writing an email to a friend in America. What if? Now I go back to 2016, an incredible victory against the odds. And it just dawned on me that maybe one could compare it to the victory that Elijah had against the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. But this is what I dug up today on the Jerusalem Post. The US elections. Now, I want to say that there's a health warning associated with this epilogue, because in no way do I want to undermine the prayers of so many believers throughout the world with respect to this issue. We are looking to pray that the Lord will give us a reversal. But I'm saying, what if? What if Joe Biden becomes president? But the fact is, it's not just him. Behind him as the vice president-elect, although it's hard to say it, you have Kamala Harris. Actually, this is her name. This is her full name. Maybe we know it. Who is Devi? It's a very interesting word. There's no L, no L. This is a picture of Devi. This is an article, actually written a long time ago in the Smithsonian magazine, which I found this morning, that was published in 1999. She has 1,000 names and faces, and countless tasks and talents. Even as a fierce warrior heroically slaying the most vicious demons, she retains her composure and radiant beauty. Westerners accustomed to a heavenly Father and to seeing virginal, subdued images of the Madonna might find Devi and her wildly vigorous feminine power quite startling. She's an Indian goddess. It's a collective name, actually, for many different goddesses. For many Hindus, however, Devi's greatest strength is that she embodies all aspects of womanhood. In the vast pantheon, she is in the top tier, as powerful as the male gods Vishnu and Shiva. Mother goddess of India and local protector for innumerable villages, she can be quiet and nurturing, but she is also a cosmic force, addressing the creation and destruction of worlds. And this is an interesting sentence. On occasion she is voluptuous and alluring, a playful temptress, a passionate lover. Kamala Devi Harris is not alone. The squad, some of these names probably you know, have been re-elected to the House of Representatives. The leadership of Black Lives Matters, we've talked about some of these people in previous times. Kamala is not alone. And it shocks me to the very core, something that I found this morning in the Jerusalem Post, and I'm going to show you the screenshot. Biden's transition team considers Clinton for United Nations ambassador. Clinton is reportedly being considered because she could potentially raise the standing of the US in the world following President Donald Trump's term. It's almost unbelievable. I felt physically sick when I saw this report. It was actually published yesterday, but I found it this morning as I was considering this talk. Kamala Devi Harris and Joe Biden. We can substitute other names. Jezebel and King Ahab. What if Elijah was afraid and he ran for his life? And Jesus said this to his disciples, but before all this, they will lay hands on you and persecute you. Before all what? If you read that passage in Luke and other passages that we collectively call the Olivet Discourse. The Lord said to Elijah, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And I found images like this. And I found maps like this, which speak about hurricanes, particularly in the United States of America. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. We discussed this several times ago now, the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco. Here's a map. And here, particularly on the left-hand side, you see a region of the United States of America that is prone to earthquakes. The San Andreas Fault, the Ring of Fire, we talked a little bit about it in the past. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And of course we've read in recent days, not just in America of course, devastating fires. And I put in this picture as well, which shows some of the fires that have raged and maybe still rage on the western coast of America. And also this image I put in because the Lord is really in control of everything that is likely to take place. But at this point we need to remember Rahab. She was right living in the wall, and yet the Lord kept her safe. And remind ourselves of this verse: God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way. What about this guy? And again, I want to tell you with all sincerity that I in no way wish, because I'm participating in the prayers that are continuing across the globe for this guy. I'm asking a question: what if? They're already speaking about the possibility that he would stand again in 2024. But what did the Lord say to Elijah? Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came. When you get there, anoint Hazael, king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha to succeed you as prophet." Who could it be? Yared Kushner? Nikki Haley? Or somebody like Ben Carson to take up the mantle? That's the question. What happens next? We shall see.